Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. We're super excited to be here and to speak about financial inclusion in Latin America. In the third edition of the Singapore FinTech Festival, Irene and I have been here the past 3 years, so it's extremely excited, and we've seen the festival grow, and in the process also the financial and FinTech industry in Latin America has grown significantly. Last year, we went from having 600 fintechs, around 600 fintechs in Latin America, to almost 1,200 at this point. And we've seen the ecosystem grow not only in terms of fintechs, but also in terms of what the regulation has been doing, in terms of the collaboration between financial institutions and banks. And those are some of the topics that we will touch today. But before further ado, we'll start with Irene, who is the CEO of Idb Lab, which is the innovation and venture arm of the IDB. But I'll let her introduce a little bit more about what the IDB does and how it helps the region in general on financial inclusion. So Irene.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you all for being here and being interested in Latin America. It's, as Laura said, it's been 3 years since we've been coming, so basically since the first festival, and always very, very well received by MAS and everyone here. And I think the presence of Latin American companies interested in coming here has been growing year on year, and this year we have the largest delegation that we've had since we started. So I think that's a reflection of how the two sides, Latin America and Asia, are starting to connect more and more, which brings me to what the IDB Lab is about within the IDB group. So the IDB is the equivalent of the Asian Development Bank for Latin America. But unlike the other regional development banks, apart from the public side and the private arm, which is IDB Invest, it has an entity which is IDB Lab to promote innovation, new concepts, early stage investing, and really support the growing number of startups across the region that we believe are the ones that are actually going to help Latin America not miss the Industrial Revolution 4.0. And that starts or includes very much startups in the fintech space, which is one of the most vibrant groups of startups in Latin America today. We back them up with capital. We also help share knowledge and establish networks, and this is why we are so interested to be here with MAS and with other multilaterals that work with us, including IFC and the Asian Development Bank. Thanks, Laura, I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. And of course, as part of the delegation that the IDB has brought to MAS, we have also Martin de los Santos, who leads the biggest e-commerce platform in the region, which in addition is one of the first unicorns that Latin America had, and now is venturing into financial services. So Martin, can you tell us a little bit more on why and how that is contributing to financial inclusion in general?
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. For those of you who are not familiar with Mercado Libre, we run the largest e-commerce platform in Latin America. We have about 10 million sellers last year and 35 million buyers, transacting roughly $14 billion of products in our platform. Over the years, we started the company back in '99. The company went public in '07. And over the years, we started as an e-commerce platform. Then we added payments. We started processing payments on our platform, then going outside the platform. More recently, logistics, and now we're going into credit. As everything we do at Mercado Libre is basically we're looking at our customers and we see what are their needs that the market is not necessarily satisfying right now. So for instance, we have roughly 600,000 merchants that transact 80% of the volume on our platform. All of them are small and medium-sized companies that don't have access to credit. We conducted a survey on our users, and roughly 80% of them had some kind of financial need, but only 20% had access to credit in the traditional banking system. Latin America, in general, has very low penetration of credit, and more so the small and medium-sized companies, for many reasons. And in particular, the main reason is that there is no data on those companies, and also there's a lot of informality on that segment. So what we did is we use basically three pillars that we have on our company to go into this business of credit. One is the knowledge that we have on these users, and the alternative data that we can use to score them, because we know their sales every single day. We process their payments, we process their sales. In addition, using our technology, we build artificial intelligence models that run roughly 1,000 variables on these merchants. And then the third, we use the distribution. We have contact on a daily basis with them, so we develop credit products that are very, very easy to use. And basically, a client on our platform can take a loan with 2 clicks on our platform without presenting any papers, without signing anything, without giving us any additional information to the information that we have. So very, very, very good user experience, and they get their money the next day on the bank. So basically, to summarize, we go into this business because our clients have a particular need, in this case, the medium-sized companies, medium and small-sized companies, and we offer them an alternative financing that they are not getting from the financial system.
No, absolutely. And all that innovation, which is bringing you to expand to new markets, I guess, Omar, also from a microfinance institutions, it's touching you as well, right? So how is MiBanco coping with that innovation and collaborating then with FinTechs to move forward?
Okay. Hello, I'm Omar. I am Innovation Manager in MiBanco. MiBanco is a Peruvian bank. It's the leader in Latin America and Peru in the microfinance industry. We're in process to transform the bank in the customer-centric organization. Okay, we're working in a roadmap that evolve our culture, include technology and innovation to create better and extraordinary experience for our customers. For us, technology and innovation are enablers to transform the bank. Okay, I believe in the integration with FinTech. I believe in the financial inclusion will reduce the number of unbanked people using technology, like biometrics, like artificial intelligence, and it could be helped for create new digital ecosystems to help poor people in Latin America.
Great. And now we have a perspective here from Carlos, who you were instrumental in putting into effect the FinTech law in Mexico. How did you guys were able to lead that process so successfully, and you were the first ones in the region to make it happen? And how is it also translating into the different countries in the region on moving forward with FinTech laws?
Oh, thank you, Laura, for the question. In Mexico, around 2015, we began analyzing the idea of having a FinTech law because there were many participants already operating in the country. In 2017, according to Finovista, which is a publication that has reviewed many countries in the region, in Mexico there were more than 200 FinTech companies, and only one of those companies had more than 400,000 clients. So there were risks that were passing in front of the eyes of the supervisors. So we decided to give legal certainty not only for the users of these FinTech companies, but also for the providers of these services. In addition to that, we wanted to prevent or to give powers to financial authorities in order to allow them to help the users of financial systems through FinTech in the case that there were any breach of the contracts, because no authority had those powers. In addition to that, we wanted to remove the anonymity of operating through FinTech in cryptocurrencies or other like that. So the authorities put a new regulation that is the first one in the region, that is an umbrella law that covers all FinTech entities that were operating in the country in that time. And also, it's very flexible because it gives powers to the authorities to make through secondary regulation, all amendments to the law that are needed in the secondary regulations. And since that time, we are seeing more presence of foreign fintech companies in Mexico and from Mexican companies operating abroad. So also we are receiving more investment from venture capital funds and private equity, since the law is covering these type of entities.
Great. Irene, how have you seen the growth in terms of investment in the region, and how is the IDB helping with that process? In addition, also because of the fintech law in Mexico, is the IDB with this convener role helping other countries in the region get to the point where Mexico is?
Yeah, thank you. What I was thinking, I was just reflecting, saying, we were sitting here a year ago, and here we are, and what's happened in 1 year is actually very positive news. And for those here or listening to us who are interested in connecting to Latin America, or fintechs that want to expand to Latin America, or banks that want to integrate with fintechs there, or vice versa, it has in 1 year actually become a much more attractive market. One, because we have a model law that, thanks to Carlos and his team, didn't exist, and that has set a benchmark that I think hopefully other regulators will adopt. And we are within the IDB group and with others helping in that process. Especially because we know that, at the end of the day, it's a market of 630 million people. It's a 5 million trillion economy if you put all the countries together. And so the more it operates as a single market from a regulatory perspective, the better for everyone, including the Mercado Libres and others, to expand more rapidly. But this is, I think, really good news that in a very short span what's happened. On the investment side, same thing. We didn't have almost any unicorns last year, and this year we've seen a spike in investment just in the last month. Investments in venture capital in the region were the equivalent of all of what was invested in the entire 2016. So I think this is pretty good news in terms of Latin America reaching a certain scale, which will hopefully make it much more attractive for investors and companies from Asia, for example, to look at Latin America as an interesting market, and hopefully help in that process of really catching up and being in the lead in terms of fintech and other industries.
Just to complement that, I think it's not only that it's a large market, as you mentioned, but also its needs of financial products. When you look at the penetration of financial products on consumers, it's less than 50% in most markets. So in Argentina, for instance, less than 50% people have banking account. When you look at penetration of credit, which is another metric that we look in general to see the development of the financial system, Argentina has credit to the private sector as percentage of GDP is 16%. It's the worst in all of Latin America, compared to, for instance, in the US, 200, and Europe is 100, that ratio. So it's not only a large market which is developing it's building the regulatory framework, but also the opportunity is huge, because there's such a need for financial products, and it's such an unbanked region that I think the opportunity is tremendous for players like large fintech companies like Mercado Libre, but also for players from other parts of the world that want to go into Latin America.
And maybe, Martin, you can expand also on, for example, why would someone like Mercado Libre, Mercado Credito come to Asia, and what is the type of collaboration that it's expecting to have with the region?
Yeah, we see we do obviously have a lot of collaboration. We process payments for Alibaba and for a lot of Asian players in Latin America, but we find that a lot of the things that we see here are similar to what's happening in Latin America. For instance, even today we were listening to the president of the Central Bank of Kenya, and a lot of things that he was referring to in terms of unbanked population and financial needs. In some cases, it's similar to some regions of Latin America. Also, we see a lot of things, a lot of advancements in terms of payments and financial inclusion and using alternative data and artificial intelligence to include more people on the credit side of the business. We see a lot of that happening in China, and we're bringing a lot of those ideas to Latin America, because in so many ways it's similar, the need of the people to access to those type of products that the banks, unfortunately, are not doing a good job of providing up until now.
Irene, I know the IDB signed an MOU with MAS yesterday. Can you explain a little bit more what was that about and what is the expectations of IDB bringing Asia into the region?
Yeah, the objective is obviously to have a platform so that we can facilitate much more this integration between fintechs and banks from Latin America and Asia. We've already seen results and a number of examples. So, for example, UOB integrated with a fintech from Bolivia, and so the world is becoming much smaller. And I think being here, which maybe sounded far away, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer also, so that, for example, the good advancements that we've seen with the fintech law in Mexico really get replicated in the region much quicker, and that means that accessing for regulators in Latin America to be able to see what MAS is doing here, the results and the sandbox, and being able to experiment and not to reinvent the wheel is extremely important. So the partnership is really to enable both things, the integration between fintechs and banks, and also the speed and the knowledge sharing and the experience sharing for the regulators.
In Carlos, of course, Mexico already has a fintech law, and we saw in Colombia that there's a specific law in terms of crowdfunding. But how do you see the rest of the region reacting to what you have led from Mexico?
Well, in fact, the IDB has been helping some countries in the region through the alliance of the Pacific Alliance. Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Mexico have been working together in order to have at least some common principles in the regulations, so that we can recognize different regulations on each country, and that a fintech company could work either in Mexico or in any of other these countries. So that makes a larger market and presents a bigger opportunity to fintech companies to operate in Mexico or one of these countries. But this could also be enlarged to the region as a whole. So I'm really expecting that something like that may happen.
And Omar, of course, that openness in terms of regulation also makes it such that there's much more competitors or companies that are offering services to the type of clients that you offer. How do you see that playing a role in MiBanco? Is it something that you guys worry about, or is it embracing collaboration the way you're going about it? Or how do you see the role of microfinance institution moving forward with all this fintech revolution happening in LATAM?
I think so. We can collaborate. Together we can develop better products and services for people. Okay, we are open to work and collaborate with fintechs, with a regulator, with different actors in the ecosystem to create a better solution for our customers. Okay, we are open to do that.
Great. I think one of the amazing things that we see from Singapore is that the industry moves like in parallel with the regulator, which is not often the case in the rest of the world. For all of you, how do you see that happen in Latin America, and each country reacting? Is it different, or how does it work?
Maybe the former regulator should be last. We should hear from the industry.
I think in our case, the experience, we have different experience, right? In the case of Mexico, the regulator took the lead and actually regulated the industry. In the case of Argentina, the central bank takes a different approach. It's more of a sandbox approach. They try to let the businesses grow and then let them experiment. And then after they grow, eventually they might regulate. And I think it makes some sense, because a lot of things that are happening, it's hard to understand how they're going to evolve. And I think the regulator is taking the approach of waiting and seeing, which is different to what happened in Mexico. I don't know what's your view on that, but I think in Argentina works very well.
But Martin, how do you see moving forward with the company in where the regulations is not clear? Like, is it easier? Do you guys take less risk, or how does it work when there's that like gray area?
Well, in a lot of things that we're doing in terms of, in our case, Mercado Libre, we have three main fintech products that are including financially people. No? Payments, which are reaching segments of a population that typically the Visa or the other typical processors of payments were not reaching. asset management. We're bringing savings to people that today, if you have the app of Mercado Libre, we have 30 million downloads in Latin America, and you can have a savings account where you can invest on saving products very easily. Even $2-3 you can invest. So it's very user friendly, and then credits, which is the business that I run. I think in those businesses, obviously, we are regulated in a lot of ways. And there are certain things that we cannot do in terms of consumer protection regulations and so on. What we are not regulated is because we are not taking deposits. So long as we are not taking deposits, I think the central bank is not getting involved in those type of activities. Then eventually, like I said, they might come in later on the game, but definitely there is no gray zones in those areas. There are certain other businesses or verticals on the fintech world, such as crowd lending or crowdfunding in general, that might need some regulation, and it's obviously better for the industry in that case or for that vertical to have regulation, because otherwise there is a gray area. But I think in payments and lending and so on, we are in safe ground to continue to experiment and not having the regulator involved yet, so long as you're not taking deposits from the public. No?
Irene, what do you feel? Do you think it makes more sense for the industry to be leading and the regulators catching up, or the other way around?
I think this approach of allowing certain things to happen as long as consumer protection thing is taken into account, I think is the way to go. And it's true that Argentina has generally been a very interesting environment to operate in, and even in things like blockchain and other things. Partly most of the best examples we see them coming from Argentina, and even in other verticals like in agri-tech, applications of IoT and AI and robotics and so on, they are actually coming from Argentina. Then they go to Brazil and then make it big like Mercado Libre did there, and that's the way to scale. But I think that environment is quite conducive.
Right. I think the risk sometimes is if you try to regulate something that is changing and you still don't know how it works, it might be complicated. So I'd like to see your view on that. How was your approach in Mexico?
Yes, of course, in the case of Mexico, it was the private sector who led the innovation before the law. And the law recognized that because, as I said before, there were many companies operating in the country without any kind of regulation. And the law tried to give a legal framework to continue this operation. But also, it created a group called the Public-Private Committee, where financial authorities will be represented, but also fintech companies, banking associations, and every financial intermediary in the country through their associations. And also the academia and international regulators want to invite to this committee, so that innovation could be seen at the time that it's happening by the regulators and modify the regulation in response to these meetings. And also the Mexican fintech law has a regulatory sandbox that is what's inspired in the Singapore and the UK experience, where we or the authorities may authorize new products or new fintech providers through technology. So with this sandbox, we want to preserve innovation, even though now it's a regulated activity.
And I think the results are already visible because, again, if you look back, a couple of years ago, the concentration of fintechs was primarily Argentina, was Brazil, and Mexico has just taken up so quickly. The last year, I think you can feel it in the entire innovation ecosystem in Mexico really coming together. So I think we hope that it continues and it spreads to Peru as well. The crowdfunding law is being drafted now, so hopefully that will be a good step.
Yeah, no, and it's super encouraging to see that now out of the 26 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, there's fintechs in almost 20 of them at this point, which is much more than that we're seeing. So it's definitely expanding. One of the things that we see is the difference in terms of the advantages that let's say regulated institutions have versus non-regulated on the use of data. Martin, how are you taking advantage, for example, of being non-regulated and how you can use data for different types of products and analysis?
I think in our case, we are again there's been a lot of debate in particular in Argentina and in other countries where we operate between the fintechs and the banks. No, there's a big pushbacks from the banking industry on the fintech industry. And the thing is that we are approaching a market. They keep saying we compete unfairly, which is one statement, no, one way of looking at it. On the one hand, they get deposits very cheap. They get funding very cheap, which we don't. And on the other hand, we are not competing with them because we are lending to people that the banks are not helping and not serving really. And the reason why we are able to do that, just to give you an example, our average loan, we lent about $320 million to our small and medium-sized companies. Our average loan is $4,500, so it's really, really small. It would be impossible for a bank to give a loan of that size economically and make money on it. And also the banks don't have access to the information on these small and medium-sized companies for diverse reasons, but in particular because the informality of that segment, the balance, the income statements and the financial statements don't really reflect the actual operation of the company. So what we do, going back to your questions on data, is that we use the data that we have on those merchants, not only transactional data in terms of volume that they transact, but also behavioral data on how they behave on our platform, how fast they solve problems with our customers, with buyers, how fast they ship products on the platform, and many different data points that we use on our models that are very good predictors of credit quality. In instance, we compare our models, our scoring using our own data compared to bureau information on this segment, and our models have twice, or our data has twice the predicting capabilities than the traditional bureau, credit bureaus have. So coming from an ecosystem of payments and e-commerce enable us to reach people both on the buyer side as well as on the merchant and seller side that the banks don't access to. So for instance, in terms of the buyers, like I said before, less than 50% of the people are banked. Less than 25% have a credit card in some parts of some countries of our region, and we are able to those 75% of people that don't have a credit card, and therefore it's very difficult for them to transact on an e-commerce platform like Mercado Libre. We're offering credit to them because again we have a lot of information that we can use that the banks don't access to yet. Eventually, we have open APIs, so they will be able to use our information as well. But we use that information to actually financially include a lot of people that don't have a banking history, don't have a financial history that the banks require in order to lend them.
This is going to be, I think, huge more and more because of also a lot of the crises that the region is encountering and how this can solve it in a way that traditional models couldn't. So for example, the region is facing the whole migration from Venezuela, 2.5 million people, 1 million going to Colombia, and this is not like the situation in Europe where the receiving countries have more than sort of $50,000 GDP per capita. This is a country with like $17,000 GDP per capita, and it's going to cost the country 0.5% of GDP absorbing this. So if you get these people really quickly integrated and with the means to actually be productive in Colombia in this case, and many are going to Peru as well, then it's gonna really solve a big problem, and financial access is fundamental for that. So clearly, Mercado Libre and others that have the ability to reach those segments or that would otherwise be outside of the traditional system, I think it's extremely important.
Maybe Omar, I don't know if you have specific examples on how is all this fintech technology allowing you to get to more customers that you usually couldn't, or offer them more services, helping with those issues that Irene was mentioning.
Yeah, in the microfinance segment, a big challenge is to have data. It's the big challenge is how to take the data for people that are unbanked. Okay. For example, we're developing a new credit scoring, but we don't have access, maybe bureau that have information about the unbanked people. We're working with fintechs to develop, to obtain that data and work together in order to create new digital credit scoring, to give access to people and to give more credits quickly and easy, and give them an opportunity to have access to financial services.
Great. I think one of the interesting thing, and I'm trying to recall if it was last year or the year before, that in Ravi Meno's speech there was a huge slide that said that people banks can use cloud technology for all of the transactions, and it was a big thing because we know that in our countries it doesn't happening. How are you seeing it, Carlos, evolving in the region? Is financial institutions being able to use cloud computing, or you see them being a little bit more how do you call it, less open to those types of technologies?
At least in Mexico, we had a regulation that allowed banks to use cloud services since 3 years or 4 years ago. And it was a really hard process in the beginning to authorize a banking institution to put their information in the cloud. But after the years passed, the CNBV moved to a much faster authorization process. And some of the providers that are outside are already working with large banks in Mexico. But also, what the authorities want to do is to remove all regulatory reports that the banks have to send to the authorities. And what the authorities are trying to do is to standardize the information that banking institutions have, so that they could send that information to the cloud, and the authority, through an API, could take that information in real time and have a faster supervision, more efficient, without having people producing these regulatory reports at the banks, and making that easier and faster for the authorities to supervise.
And you mentioned APIs, and of course we've seen all the conversation around Singapore. It's been around APIs. How are you guys seeing the possibility of doing open banking in the different countries? Are corporates and financial institutions being able to do their own API gateways, or they're using different ways to connect and integrate the services? Or how are you seeing open banking happening?
I think it's going to be farther away from what you're seeing in Europe. I don't see the banks yet being so open to open banking. But I think some central banks are pushing it, and they're seeing the need to open up, because again, significant parts of the population are not being served by the traditional financial system. So there's I think it's a small discussion when the banks try to guard their the large market share of a relatively small business. I think it's a small, it's very short-sighted. I think going back to the discussion of fintechs and banks, for the past couple of years, they've been pushing back a lot, but now more and more we're seeing cooperation between banks and fintechs, because again, we're reaching parts of the population, of the market that they cannot reach themselves, and then we're packaging those loans and selling it back to the banks. So we're actually being a channel for the banks to reach people that they were not able to reach in the past, and also these people that start to have a credit history with us, then eventually will be credit clients of the banks themselves. So I think they're slow to move, but in the long term, in particularly in a region where the financial sector is so undeveloped, I think it will be to their advantage in the long run. It will be a bigger pie. There will be more competitors. Obviously, the fintech companies will take some share of that, but the pie will grow. So it will be in everybody's best interest. And obviously, the development of the country will benefit from it, no? Because financial inclusion is also inclusion in terms of health, education, and many other things that come after financial inclusion.
And there are ways to make it easier as well for the banks that are not there yet. So, for example, we supported the creation of FinConecta, and as a middleware platform that helps the integration between the banks and fintechs. actually make it extremely easy for banks because they don't even have to have their own API. It does it for them. So I think banks have no excuse. And I think they're going to see, I mean, in FinConnecta, we already have 200 fintechs connected with 20 banks and more coming up. And I think that is going to create a certain momentum and wave, and they will see that they have to really kind of get on board.
Right. I don't want to be too critical of the banks. It's just that it comes very natural to us in the technology business to cooperate and compete at the same time with players. And I think this is the type of thing we're going to be competing with banks in certain areas, but also there's a lot of cooperation. And at the end of the day, it's not a zero-sum game. It will be a bigger market for everybody. And slowly they're moving in that direction, obviously.
In the case of Mexico, the law obliges all financial entities, including the new fintech entities that are authorized, to share their information, public information, aggregated information from the financial entities, and also transactional information of their clients with the authorization of this. So the CNBV has 24 months to issue the regulation for this to happen, but already this is something bigger in some way than the regulation in the UK, for instance, because in the UK it was only for the largest banks and for one financial product. In the case of Mexico, all the information, all the products has to be shared with whoever asks for this information. And there is a debate that happens all over the world if financial entities are in a disadvantage with GAFAs that don't not have to share this information.
Absolutely. I think that's a debate that all of you have, and I'm sure Martin would say that no, there's no disadvantage. They should continue as they are. We're in the question part of our panel, so I'm trying to read this very small print in the laptops with the questions. So one is, what is the biggest challenges? Perfect. What is the biggest challenges to financial institutions in Latin America?
To financial inclusion. Yep.
Okay.
Respond for that.
To financial inclusion.
I think it's probably access to data was a big challenge. I mean, banks, even when they want to lend, they go to the bureau and don't have information in a lot of people. And I think we have a role to play on that. The e-commerce platforms bringing new data to, even social media and so on. Distribution and connectivity, but I think that's overcome. I think the penetration of mobile phones, everybody has a potential bank branch on their pocket with a mobile phone, so that's not an issue. And then financial literacy. We need a lot of financial education. You can bring products to people, but they need to understand that the products and where they're using for, I mean, credit in particular. So I think probably literacy would be a big challenge, I think.
But I think it's also having more capital flowing into early stage companies that are really the real innovators coming up with new models, and still the region is quite behind in that. So we invite all the investors interested in venture capital in the region to come through the Latin American pavilion, and we can tell you more. $1 billion or so flew to the sector last year. This is the same as in the entire year in Israel for a region that is like 630 million people. So I think we need a little bit more capital and support for the startups that are really innovating here. For example, we funded Solvers. Solvers, also from Argentina, is allowing financial inclusion for women domestic employees, and these are potentially 15 million people in the region that are absolutely in the informal sector. Automatically 25% more revenues. They are all of a sudden visible to the system and absolutely subject to get a loan. And I think allowing those companies that they may not be born as fintechs, they are born as in this case, a platform to formalize domestic employees, but they become great vehicles for financial inclusion. So I think we need to support that segment a lot more.
Omar.
Yeah, I would like to talk about for me, the biggest challenge is financial education. As a bank, we need to promote the benefits of the use financial services. I think so we can work together with fintechs, with all ecosystems to promote a better financial education. Okay, for me it's a big challenge for financial inclusion.
One of the things that I like the most, for example, on you see in the U.S. that Uber had a lot to do with getting people to use a bank account, and it was not the promotion of financial services. It was useful. So for the drivers, it was extremely useful to actually have a bank account, and then they got into the system. How much of that are we seeing in Latin America? Is financial inclusion driven by, let's say, marketing of the good things about having a bank account or being into the system, or because they need it for something else? For example, in the case of solvers, they definitely see the use and then they get involved.
Well, I think that, as it was mentioned before, financial literacy is a very important component for the use of financial services, and also to take advantage of what fintech companies can offer to the users of financial services. And also, in the morning it was mentioned that in the case of Mexico, a lot of the women that receive welfare from the government, around 7 million women, do not want to preserve their balance in the account, and they withdraw the whole amount each 2 months when they receive that, because they don't know what can they do with that and how to transact in their communities. So it's also about the construction of an ecosystem where they can have use and access to these financial services.
But maybe to go back on data, right? So the data that you mentioned, Martin, I think it's also extremely important. So particularly in sectors that are totally informal, we're working, for example, in some of the neighborhoods in Buenos Aires, the most differentiated neighborhoods, is starting with digital ID and with digitization of property titles on blockchain. That will really help banks become much more comfortable. I mean, it already sort of solves quite a number of problems. So I think you have to start from that end.
But even people that don't have experience with financial products, they really catch up fast. I mean, the example in our merchant base, we have about 120,000 merchants that are subject of credit as of today. So they have an offer on our platform. They can take a credit, Saturday at 3 a.m. if they want. They get the credit, and the next Monday they'll have their money on the bank. And we see that they learn very fast. And people who took a credit with Mercado Credito, our product, sell on Mercado Libre. Their sales grow year over year 85%, significantly more than other players on the platform. And because they know that the more they sell on Mercado Libre, the better offer they will get. They use their funds. 66% of our merchants use the money that we lend to them to buy more inventory to sell on the platform. So I think, going back to your question on how we promote those services, it's just that when they use it, they have to have a very good user experience, and they have to see the benefit on their business in the case of merchant credits. In the case of consumers, it's kind of obvious, right? Not having access to financing is an inhibitor for people buying particularly large ticket items. So that's also a benefit that is very tangible to them, particularly to people that don't have credit cards or access to credit in general.
Great, so we are almost over, so to close, why don't we leave with an advice from each of you on maybe investors from Asia or fintechs or financial institutions that want to come into Latin America and the Caribbean or want to do business with the region? What should they do? What would be your advice?
I would advise them to take a look at the Idb web page, because there is a lot of information in the different publications
Idb Lab.
that you have, Idb Lab, and so that they can have a broad spectrum of what is going on in Latin America, and if they want to go to Mexico, they should go to Deloitte.
Okay.
Come to the pavilion, right there. Visit us there for the next day and a half, and also obviously very open for anyone that wants to come to the region.
I would say buy shares of Mercado Libre on NASDAQ, but aside from that, I think there's a big ecosystem of companies that are developing very, very interesting things. It's a huge market with a lot of opportunity, in particular in FinTech, because the market is untapped, really. So get down to Latin America and you will be surprised.
Okay, in MiBanco, we believe in the FinTech and banks cooperation. We are open to work with the Asian people to develop a new ecosystem to help poor people and to reduce the people that had unbanked.
So IDB came with a delegation of 25 Latin American and Caribbean companies. And after the panel, everybody's going to be at the Latin American Pavilion. So you're all welcome to join to interact with not only the panelists, but also the delegation. So thank you so much. And we hope to see you next year again. Thank you.
Thank you.